Okay. Hi everyone. This is a book club. Only Mr. Fufu showed up, so it'll just be probably me talking into the camera. But today was supposed to be Sartre's, or the full discussion on existentialism is humanism by Sartre. And we went over some of the basics in the introduction, going over his whole existence precedes essence, the kind of time and place that this was happening, what it was about, which was a defense to the critiques of this type of secular existentialism. He wanted to diffuse the criticisms, clarify slogans that he had, argue against the Marxists and the Christians that were kind of attacking all of his claims and his philosophy. But kind of briefly, all of this takes place right after the Second World War in Paris. And during this time in philosophy, and I guess in the world in a bit more general, there was a lot of moral disorientation. It was no longer a super clean cut secularism. It wasn't a super clean cut Christianity based society. There was a lot of uh, moral, moral disorder and moral confusion going on after the atrocities of the Second World War. As maybe some of you guys know, a lot of the Christians who ended up having to go and fight in this war after seeing everything they saw decided to let go of their faith. Because, how could all good, all loving God that they've been worshiping and looking at for guidance allow for such a cruel meat grinder of a war? And then at the same time, a lot of the atheists that were going into this war, they were leaving it, becoming completely devout Christians because, you know, it's almost as if God spared them, God spoke to them, they're alive because of God. So a lot of people going into war had their, upon leaving, they had their whole moral compasses switched around. And so, Sartre's claim here in existentialism as a humanism is a public defense of this secular existentialism, one that kind of I don't want to say rejects God, but doesn't accept God as a as a beacon or as an anchor for how we should live, especially how we should live morally. His whole claim, basically, his whole slogan was that existence precedes essence. That there's no pre-given human nature that we have. What follows from human nature, ethics, politics, policy, laws, all of that stuff is up to us. We don't have a guy in the sky that we can look at and hope to get answers from. And so his famous line is existence precedes essence. Uh, the common the common metaphor that had been used up until this point about why humans are the way they are was seeing God as a type of designer, a type of divine being that crafted man in his image, in the image of God, and that was human. And human nature was simply this design. He begins his lecture talking about the paper knife analogy, or a pen analogy, saying that its essence, its utility, its what it's meant to do is to write or to cut paper. I think it's a paper knife, yeah, to cut paper. So its purpose came before it was manufactured. People had to think up of it and then build it into existence. And he's saying that humans are the complete opposite of that. We weren't designed in a certain way with a certain thing in mind. We weren't tailored to look a certain way or to have certain traits and to think certain things. We are just like a clean slate that just kind of pop into existence. Kind of like a video game character that's just at level 0 with no class, with no clothing, with no additions. You're just a completely raw, empty vessel. And so this was pretty outrageous to think at the time because it was not the common view. If man is just some sort of like raw sheet or this like raw paper type thing spit up onto the world, then how can we derive any type of moral rule or moral act? And so the point he's making here is like an ontological point first. He says that first we exist, and then what comes after is the ethical fallout, responsibility, creating yourself, the projects we engage in, and all that. That we should not blame God or nature or our environments or biology for what we ought to be. Being is a task. It's not a given whatsoever. We need to actively engage in being, and in doing so, create ourselves. So, for example, he would say, take someone with a predisposition, like a predisposition to like cheese, or to, let's say, like a personality trait, like someone who's predisposed to be introverted. Sartre wouldn't deny that maybe there's some sort of like genetic things going on, or some sort of environmental factors that shape you into being this way. But it's all about how you take it up, how you take the cards that you're given and then play that hand. We're all dealt a hand of cards, but that's not the important part. The important part is how we play those hands. And so no longer are we shaped in this perfect image of how we ought to be. It's we need to kind of like create it, basically. And that was his whole existence precedes essence. The next thing he kind of moves into or starts to talk about a little bit is this radical freedom. People will often say that Sartre says that we're condemned to be free because no one chose to come into existence. It's not like before you were in the womb or before you were conceived, someone asks you, do you want to exist and do you want to be born in Canada in this place and these be your parents? No one chose that. You just kind of like pop up into existence. So in that way, we're kind of condemned. Like whether we like it or not, we came into existence. We came into being. However, once that has occurred, once we exist, we're terribly responsible for what we make of that, for who we end up being, and for what we end up doing with our existence. He says it's not caprice. Freedom is not caprice. It's not a type of like, do whatever you want, laissez-faire, like, oh, nice, now that we exist, you can just, do whatever the hell you want. That's not really what he's going at. Because that would be, in a way, not choosing to be anything. If you're just like kind of strutting through life with your hands in your pockets, whistling, not really doing anything, not choosing to do something is itself a choice. And so he brings in kind of these two distinctions that we need to kind of keep clear or to tease apart. The plasticity and the transcendence. So the plasticity is the genetic predispositions, your material body, your social position, your geographic location. The transcendence is the projects we engage in, things beyond the given. And so kind of like an example you can think up of is you can be placed anywhere in the world with whatever type of ethnic background, socioeconomic background, but you end up choosing what to do with those cards that you're dealt. So this is his whole radical freedom idea. We're condemned to be free, but we are responsible for acting. We're completely responsible to how we should act. He brings in three key points, three key, let's call them aspects of human agency. Transcendence and facticity. Facticity, which I think it's a poor translation to English because it was like translated from French to English, but facticity and like the matter of fact, and then the transcendence. But yeah, he says that there's three main aspects to human nature or to human agency. to what it means to be a human. And these three things are that we talked about last week were anguish, abandonment, and despair. And two of those terms, if you guys have read any Heidegger or Kierkegaard, they're going to sound really familiar because abandonment was Heidegger's whole thesis on God left us, basically. Despair was also a big thing that Kierkegaard worked on, like existential despair, being so alone in the world. But the first one, or anguish or angoisse in French, is that at one point or another in life, we are faced with the realization that we have choices that we need to act on, and in doing so, you're almost like imposing your value onto the world. So take any tricky situation that you might be confronted with in life, like whether or not to tell a lie, or to whistle blow at your company, or to help someone when they're like in need. Every action you take from there on out, it's not just the very personal subjective thing. You're like imposing your values onto the world like a stamp whenever you do anything. His example is that of a military commander choosing a risky plan. Yes, it was a subjective choice, but it affects the entire battle, the entire war, and all of the soldiers in it. We all have this like super heavy responsibility to act in accordance to what we value. And because of this, we develop an anguish, an anxiety. The next one is this Heideggerian term of abandonment. Since we are this blank slate in the world, there's no God telling us what to do. There's no parent telling us this is what's right, this is what's wrong, and you must abide by it. We're just like terribly free. What happens here is we just feel like, oh crap, there's no one out there, there's nothing to do. And then the example he brings in here was that of a student who came to him one day and presented him with like his dilemma. He goes to Sartre and he says, well, like, look, my mother needs me to live. If I leave her, her life would be ruined. She would be extremely sad, maybe even, end her life. She needs me, basically. I need to take care of her. I am the only way that she can have a happy existence. So on one hand, that's what kind of has to. He feels a tug towards his mom and to be there for her. On the other hand, this is World War II. France was just taken over by Germany, and there is a strong idealism of like French Revolution and freedom. So he feels like this tug between having to stay with his mom or going off to join the French resistance. And so he asks Sartre, he's like, okay, well, what should I do here? And so what Sartre kind of says is that no ideology, no utilitarianism, no Kantianism, no priest, no teacher, no friend can decide for you. And if you are even to go to one of these people to ask for help, you're already presupposing a choice. So, for example, if you were to go to a utilitarian student, if you're to go to a utilitarian and ask him, you're already kind of presupposing that maybe it's an ideal or the greater number of people that you should fight for, join the French resistance. So we can learn about all of the ideology that exists out there in the world, all of the principles that we can abide by. But you need to make the choice about which one to follow or which one to honor in that current moment. No one can teach you. And that's this feeling of abandonment. There's no more guidelines. There's no Instagram or there's no YouTube tutorial on like what to do for you to follow. It's like you're on your own, dude. Sorry. The last one is that of despair. And he goes on to explain this one in saying that obviously we're forced to act in life. We need to make choices. And even not making a choice is a choice in itself. However, every choice we do, every act we engage in, it comes without guarantees. There are absolutely no guarantees. And so, it all depends upon you. we need to act in accordance to our values, but there is nothing that is promising results. It's like if you're starting up a business, you can do your best to get the product nice and going, to hire good people, but at the end of the day, it's how the market receives this product or how external factors kind of play along the startup. Sometimes your startup will do good, sometimes it won't do good, but all you have is the things that you can control. It's kind of like, honestly, like stoic in a sense. Saying you can only control a certain amount of things, do the best you can at acting in these ways that you value, and then, whether you like it or not, it might work out. This like lucidity of agency, like understanding that it is some things are up to us, but that's all we have, and there's no guarantees. So then here come the critics. The critics come in and they start to. Oh, actually, I'm gonna check the recording. Hopefully, I really hope the audio is being picked up. Oh well, if it's not, it's not. This was me talking to you, Mr. Cooper. But his next part was answering a critique that still to this day, is pretty understandable, pretty strong, honestly. And it's just like in saying that, well, Sartre, if there's no God up there, if there's no universal code, if there is no universal law that we can listen to and follow, then aren't you just saying that anything goes, that anything matters, that whatever happens, happens? And so his response kind of to this would be that, just like we were mentioning before, that our acts end up imprinting themselves onto the world, it's almost like our values, when we act on them, they end up having to be universal because they affect everyone else. That this universalization, it comes through existence and through act, or acting on these values, basically. It's not that anything goes, it's that how we act imposes itself universally onto the world. Which is, it's a fair response, but I'm not even sure I totally understand it or can stand behind it. An example I kind of came across online was things like whistleblowing. So imagine like you're in a company where they're doing shady business. You can whistleblow, like tell on the company you're working for or anything like that. But in doing so, you're like staging a claim, you're making a statement about how things should be. That you should not be acting in these types of ways. It's almost like you're saying things should be universal by whistleblowing. Because you're not just telling yourself, oh, that was immoral or that was wrong. Once you whistleblow, you're telling everyone else out there in the world, you're saying, I don't think that this should be wrong. The universal codes should be different, and I'm going to hold you guys accountable to what I feel like they should be. And then you're like imprinting it and shoving it onto the world. So the projects we engage in, the responsibilities we take up, the claims we make onto others, those are the things that end up pushing this universal responsibility outwards. At least that's how I kind of understood what he was trying to say. The next topic he brings up in this lecture / book, I guess, or PDF if you're reading that, is that of bad faith and authenticity. And so bad faith is this it's this like sneaky way of getting out of the freedom that he was talking about before. He says that like we're condemned to be free. We really need to make the choices for ourselves, whether we like it or not. And it's quite scary, and it brings anxiety and all these types of things. But bad faith is when we negate that, or when we kind of like ignore it or sweep it under the rug, by attributing our actions not to our own decisions or not to our own choices, but to those that are external. So it's like saying, oh no, I can't help you because it's company policy not to. Or, oh no, sorry, I can't say this because society says it shouldn't be said. It's just like kind of like putting the blame on something, or putting the choice and the onus of these acts of how you should act on other people instead of yourself. As a manager, I couldn't do this people like me can't do this. So like all that type of trying to like being sneaky and trying to get away out or find a way out of this free will, out of this autonomy of choice. That's what he calls bad faith, and we should not be living in bad faith. It's not a good way to live if we want to fully embrace our human agency, which if we're like remembering is this anguish, abandonment, and despair. All those three things, if we're feeling them, we are being true human agents, kind of. At least that's how I'm understanding it, but I'm still not positive. I'm not a Sartre scholar or anything. It would be nice for someone to, if I totally butchered that, but authenticity is very, very difficult, is basically his point here. That bad faith is easy and it'll reduce the anguish that we have. But if we want to live authentically, like in our nature, the way we ought to be, then we mustn't have this bad faith. So his main critiques to this way of living, they come from like a bunch of different angles. He's getting attacked by the communists and by the Christians, by the serf class or like the peasant class. The first big attack that kind of hits him is this, what a pessimistic, nihilistic view of the world. That there's no objective truths, that you kind of can't do anything about anything. You can't change minds or anything like that. It's like, oh, everything sucks. There's no meaning. You're screwed. You're all by yourself. Too bad, so sad. He says, well, no, well, this doctrine, or maybe not this doctrine, but like this, these points I'm putting in front of you, this radical freedom, yeah, it's super demanding. It's terribly difficult to live authentically. But it's not nihilistic. Nihilistic is saying that nothing matters. What he's saying is that living authentically is demanding. The world itself just alone is value neutral. The value comes from how we act onto it through the projects we engage in. That's where value comes from, or where our values come from. The other attack was the one we kind of already talked about, which is that of subjectivism and anything goes, whatever. He answers that one by saying, well, no, when we act, we are imposing our values onto others, just like that military commander who makes that choice personally, but everyone else is being affected. All of the other soldiers from his army and from the other, the state of affairs between the countries, he's affecting everything. So it's like, no, it's not just anything goes. It's that the choices we end up making, they could be we're acting as if they ought to be universal. Then he talks a little bit about, or he gets attacked by saying this is very like a very bourgeois claim, or that freedom is situated. I didn't understand it, so I'm not even going to talk about it. And then the other one is that it's a very incoherent view of the world. That how can we impose these universal laws if they're not a priori? So like thinking back to Kant and stuff like that, he deduced. His whole thing was deducing the universal claims, right? So like through our reason, understanding that certain things are just like the moral truths. Sartre is saying this is not a priori. It's not something that everyone just like knows. It's something that we need to project and something that we need to act onto. A cool analogy would be like of a painter with a blank canvas. There's no way he ought to paint, but once he's made the painting, it's the way the painting should be, or ended up being. And I don't know if I totally like understand that analogy, or totally understand his response to this critique of incoherence, but that's what he kind of says or mentions in it, in some of his papers and stuff like that. Why humanism? So that was like why existentialism is a humanism. I would just say that existentialism is a humanism because everybody ends up existing whether they like to or not. It stakes human dignity. Human dignity, it relies on our capacity to self-legislate. Not because we're like the type of, I don't know how to even put words to this. Not because no one else is, but maybe because I don't know. I don't know how to explain this, and I don't think I understand it. So I just won't talk too much about it. But the analogy that is kind of useful to some people, not really much to me, is that man is kind of like a workbench. We're not already a work of art. Um, we are a process that we end up coming to value through the action of working, or through the action of doing acting and stuff like that. Not so much that we are already kind of like built in service of something, or in service of a purpose, the same way like a pen is built in service of writing. We are just a blank slate, and all of that is because we just happen to exist, and all humans who just happen to exist need to decide on our values. Kind of, I don't know if he's like repeating himself or making new points, but that's what I picked up on like the later half of that lecture. And then the last thing I kind of would want to mention, that at least I picked up on from this, and I was reading some of this. I I ripped this book in half because it was like absolutely massive. Um, I didn't even end up touching this half. I read a little bit of this half, which is like a in-depth view of his philosophy. The humanism is an existentialism is like a little intro, like a little taste of his whole thing. If you want the whole thing in full, it's this book. But the last thing I kind of wanted to say is that, or like no, a couple of objections. I remember when I was taking a class on this in undergrad. There was a common objection that said, well, isn't Sartre just saying that like if we're creating ourselves, isn't he just saying that like genetics, environmental factors, biology, all that type of stuff is irrelevant? And to that, the easy answer was like of the distinctions we were making at the very, very beginning, which was the distinction between facticity and transcendence. Things can be a matter of fact, but it doesn't mean we must neglect transcending, right? So like you're dealt your hand of cards, you can't change that. That's the facticity. That's the existence. That's the biology. But it's up to you on how you play these cards, on how you play the game. And that's the transcendence part. So no, he's not saying that biology is irrelevant. It does matter what type of cards you are dealt. But that's not the important part. We shouldn't be focusing too much on that. The important part is how we play the game. Because you can't change the cards you were dealt. You can only change how you play the game, the acts you engage in, and the values you attach yourself to or act in service of. Freedom means limitless options. Some people accuse Sartre of saying it's like, oh, you can do whatever you want. You can choose absolutely anything. But we know in the world that's just not the case. If I decided I wanted to slam dunk on an NBA hoop, it's not a matter of choice. I just can't. I'm limited by my height and by the muscles in my body. I can't jump that high, and I never will be able to. So when he's talking about freedom, it's not so much like I can do anything. It's more so that we have choices and a responsibility on how we should project our values and choices, like the stamp, onto the world and onto other people that he was talking about before. Not an infinite menu of choices, but just that there are certain constraints in life, just like there are constraints in a game. And we have the freedom to choose to play in a certain way in the game versus another way in the game. Not that we can do whatever we want. And then the last one is that oftentimes when people see the word despair, when we were talking about his three terms of anguish, abandonment, and despair, well, the first thing that comes to mind when you think of despair, it's like just a really depressed person, or I'm absolutely hopeless. And again, he's not using it in this nihilistic term. He's using it more in like a stoic term, like act only on what depends on you. So like only the things that you can kind of change. Should you be acting in service of those, of the outcomes you want? Some things you can change, some things you can't change. But this despair comes from knowing that we can only change so much and that the outcomes aren't guaranteed. That's basically all I really care to say about this lecture that he kind of explained. Now I'll just, I guess, open. I guess a couple of you guys joined a bit later, but it was mostly me just talking to myself for a while. It will be nice to hear something from someone else, if any of you guys read it, something like that. Did you do the reading, Carson, or did you like listen to the lecture or something?
I did listen to the lecture. I didn't do the reading. I had a really busy week. No, I just personally find a lot of like I find like so much to disagree with Sartre on like almost everything because I feel like he starts from like assumptions that I just think are like fundamentally flawed, and then he like tries to go through a bunch of backflips to like justify the like really shaky starting foundations. Um, and I think he just like mires himself in a bunch of like really convoluted claims that seem like when you stack them all together, it feels like a very dangerously articulated house of cards. Um, yeah, I just I reject like all of it. I think there's like much better attempts at like some kind of existentialism, even though I think I'm like inclined to deny like all forms of existentialism for some kind of essentialism, but I think Sartre does a particularly like incoherent job of it.
What about what about his really like his like hallmark one of existence precedes essence?
Precedes essence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just reject that entirely. That's like the main thing that I think is incoherent.
Huh. So would you say that essence precedes existence or something else altogether?
Yeah, I'm like a hardcore Platonist, so I think like essence precedes existence in all things.
When it comes to humans as well, I guess.
Yeah, everything.
So what is that? What is the essence of human, or what is the essence of man?
I think the like specific unique essence of man. I'm not even committed to the idea of it being unique, but I'll just throw that in there because I do think we are relatively unique as far as we know. Um, would be some kind of like rational animal.
Essence of a rational animal.
That is what that is the essence of human is to be a rational animal.
And so, like people in vegetative states or something like that, do they no longer possess this essence?
Well, essence denotes a capacity. Doesn't necessarily. It's not like a like to have the essence of a thing is not necessarily to like have the thing.
Yeah.
It's just it's like a pre. It's a like a precursor to having the thing. So like it just means that you have the capacity for a thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the thing. So like little like tiny children have the essence of being of like a human, even though like they themselves are probably not like rational quite
Mhm.
yet, but like they have the capacity to develop into like rational
When does this essence
animals.
come into being? Is it like transcendental, or is it like at the moment of conception? Or if it's platonic, I would get
Well,
transcendental.
it's transcendental insofar as the essence exists like as like the form of man, but then like the particular human that comes to possess like the essence like would it would have like a relation to the form um when it comes into like existence.
So, like, if there were no men on Earth, would there still be that essence of man? Or
uh yeah, it just wouldn't exist in the world. Like so you're talking like the essence of like male human, not like the essence of man, right?
sure, yeah.
Yeah. There just would there wouldn't be like a instantiated essence of man. There would just be an essence, a singular like existing form of man, and then there would be no particulars with instantiation relations.
hmm Yeah, I'm undecided on where I stand, because to me it does seem I don't find anything particularly essential to man. I'm like inclined to think that it's all like a little bit random. We just happen to have these abilities and stuff like that. Not that we are essentially these capacities, like the like rational capacity. I'm leaning towards that way, but I don't really follow along with the rest of it.
It might be that, but even insofar as if you're willing to accept that, I still just don't understand what it means for existence to precede essence, because I feel like for there you could deny the Platonism stuff entirely and like reject like I'm much more committed to like Platonism about like math
Yeah.
and Platonism about like properties than I am about like Platonism about like objects, for example.
Huh.
So like you could just get off the bus at like Platonism about objects and just like go in for Platonism about properties and Platonism about object or about like mathematical objects.
Hmm.
But even if you accept Platonism about properties, then insofar as something exists, it stands in some relation to some set of properties that it participates in. And even then, the essence is still existing before in some senses like ontologically prior. It's not like um prior in like a like temporal sense, but it's certainly ontologically prior to the thing. Like I would say, like you take it, like look at it from a different angle. Like the in some sense, the existence of anything is grounded in its properties, and so which would just mean to say that its essence precedes its existence. Like I actually don't know. Like Sartre has this view of humans as like essentially like blank canvases.
Yeah.
And like our personalities might be blank canvases, although I would like reject that entirely. We know like so much about like developmental neuroscience and like evolutionary psychology that like lots of things are baked into like we can like there's we have such a good knowledge of evolutionary psychology that like you can make really good predictions about behavioral outcomes based off of like stress levels of the mother in pregnancy.
Oh yeah.
So like I don't even know what it would be like for a human to be a genuine blank slate. But even if you would accept that, like okay, that's fine. But then he's like really talking about a really bastardized definition of essence here, which is really like so it's not even essence precedes or existence precedes essence. It's like the existence of the person precedes the personality of the person. But that sound like if that's the claim you're going to make, which like I don't actually think Sartre's making, but if that's like how we could claim he's making, then like I don't really know if I reject it as strongly, but I also just reject it because I just think we know too much about human psychology to accept that kind of claim. But even if that was the case, like even if that was the case, I just don't think that's a particularly like useful or like particularly interesting claim to be made. Certainly not one that he could get the rest of what he's trying to attempt with his philosophy off the ground with.
I'm just
Um,
thinking like
he,
like you know all those like designer arguments, right? Like you find a clock in the forest or something like that. Like let's
yeah,
just start off with something really simple or straightforward, like a stump or a rock. Is its essence that of a chair? Probably say like no, but it's an affordance that it has. It could be a chair if we wanted it to be a chair. And I'm inclined to think that life forms are that too. We just happen to kind of be a thing, and then we can do a lot of things with it. We can end up being like a dad if we want to, or a fireman, or run with it. But just the very very beginning, once we are in this like forest, or like once we're like plopped into the world just like this, we have predispositions, just like that stump would have a predisposition to be set on fire if there was fire around it, or to split in half if an axe went through it. We have the same personality predispositions and like the color of our skin and all that type of stuff. But essentially, there's nothing. It's just like a combination of molecules and whatnot, and then that's it. It's only descriptive at that point.
sure. I mean, I think I can just agree with all of that and like still spin it like platonically because um I'm actually reading through Kripke's Naming and Necessity right now, and he makes this really like brilliant distinction between which like I think a lot of people just assume he makes the distinction between a priori and necessary,
Okay.
and he points out that like a lot of people take like a priori truths to be necessary, and this just like cannot be the case. Like it just is evidently clear that it cannot be the case. That I forget what example he gives, but he gives a really clear example of like a clearly a priori truth,
Yeah.
um,
So
but
like
one that's like not necessary.
you can't a priori know that H2O is water. But
Right? Yeah.
yeah.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. That's one, and then vice versa. Right? Like there can be a priori truths that just are contingent. Um, and so like I just think I would say that like I think you can come to know the essence of a thing, or like you can just purely a priori attend to all the like forms that a particular like participates in,
Yeah.
nonetheless, those like the forms that that particular participates in are contingent. Like those participation relations are definitely contingent in some cases. Like you said, like
I
a
think
father.
a better word might be like that these you can say that they're contingent things, but maybe just use like the term like they have an affordance of something. Like water has the affordance of wetness and of like liquidity and like these other things, like these other properties. But that's not its since I don't know. I get where you're going though. I'm torn.
It's definitely tricky. The bounds of my thought on this on like the forms about objects is a lot less clear than
Yeah,
like almost I'm almost convinced as like convinced of any thought like view that I have that like Platonism about like math is pretty legit, and like all the other forms of like all the other attempts for math object like math propositions properties, all of these are like pretty incoherent.
but the like platonic maths or let's just say like objects, like it's like one thing in this realm of forms. It's not a lot of possible things. It's one
Yeah.
like a horse. The form of a horse, it's one thing. It's not something that can be ridden or something that can pull cars or something that can be eaten. And that's where I see like the that's why I'm kind of attracted to Sartre's point here. It's that even if we go into this realm of forms and you take the thing, you need to accept that the horse is one unified horse as opposed to a possible bunch of things. And I don't know. I don't know if it's just like a linguistic thing at that point though.
Carson, what would it take to like falsify what you're saying? Like, what would you expect if what you're saying is true? Like, how would we test it? Is my question.
I don't think you necessarily can falsify Platonism. I think you just come up with a theory that's like more parsimonious, and then like I would accept it if there was
I think you
like
can
Platonism is
falsify it. Imagine one day you find the number two under a rock. It's not gonna happen, but like
yeah okay. I'm not even sure that like that statement is coherent though. I don't know what it would even mean to like find the number two under a rock.
me neither. But if
Um,
you were to find the number two under a rock, then you take a bunch of drugs and you find the number two under a rock. Then that
yeah.
will prove.
Yeah, I just think that at that point, maybe the drugs that you took weakened the barrier between the dimensions of like reality and the Platonic realm of forms. But I think like so like Platonism is like the most ontologically extravagant like theses for like mathematical. Let's just like restrict the domain to like mathematical objects because it like makes it cleaner. But we can like talk about like other areas too if you want. But like I think like Platonism is by far like the most extravagant one, and like you should only accept it if you just think that all the other ones are probably bad. And it's like you have to have good reasons for thinking that all the other ones are bad. I just think that like all the other ones are bad and like don't work, and so like you just have to like you know like in some sense Platonism is like the worst. It's like the worst option, except all the other options just don't make any sense. So it's like you just have to accept it because it's the only one that it's the best of like a bad lot.
It's like democracy. What would you say? Yeah. What would you say as your response to like just typical materialism? Like what's your critique of that?
What do you mean typical materialism?
Like there's just material objects. There's no immaterial objects. There's no essences. You just like walk around and there's stuff, atoms.
There's no
Yeah, so
Typical
like
science view.
I think that so I think that like unless you want to just deny all of the relations, which you just can, I guess. But it seems to me like when we look in the world, there are like there's when you have like two apples and two oranges, it seems like there's like some shared thing in common here. Um, namely this idea of like having two apples and two oranges, and like we can relate the fact that I have two apples and two oranges using like the relatively similar faculties going on in our heads. And so like if you want to admit that there's like some kind of similarity going on here, like obviously the apples and the oranges are different, but like I have two of each, and like I understand what it means that I have two of each, because it's the same like the same way I'm using the word two when I talk about the amount of oranges I have is the same sense when I talk about the number of apples I'm having. And so like that calls out for some kind of explanation. And I just think that like all the other
pattern recognition and evolutionary faculties working to make those relations, and then just go with
yeah, but you still, like, regardless of how you try to explain it, you still have to explain insofar as what faculty is going on there, right? So like broadly speaking, there'd be like
of neurons, like of a cortex.
Right, but don't you see, like, you're committing that there's a pattern, right?
Yeah, you're right.
When you say like pattern recognition of neurons, I agree. That's probably what the underlying mechanism is, but you're still committing to the existence of the pattern, right? But like the person who's like a complete nihilist about relations of this kind would say that like we're just confused when we think that there's like there's a similarity between there being two apples and two oranges. Like we're just completely confused, and I just think that is like that's completely confused. So insofar as you admit that there's a pattern going on, you have to like ask what the pattern is consistent. And so like there's like the Platonic answer, which is like the really extravagant, like there's this form of two-ness and it exists in like this Platonic heaven, and like, you know, the reason why there's a similarity between the two things is because they're really standing in relationship to the same form of two-ness. And so that's how we can recognize two apples and two oranges.
Could it not be that like these are just material objects that we are like viewing in the form of human constructs of like, and it just so happens that
there's like the other ways of going about this would be like a more Aristotelian understanding, where you don't admit of like there being these Platonic forms. You just think that there are like universals that exist in all the objects that have them. So that might be what you would say is like, well, the reason why there's a similarity between there being two apples and two oranges is because there's a universal of two-ness that exists in both the collection of two oranges and two apples, and we recognize them being similar because we're recognizing the universal.
Well, also here's my problem. Like you
like just arbitrary or
yeah, like
what do you mean?
You're saying universal, you're saying like patterns, right? Like
yeah. So like
I admit that there's patterns. Like I'm not a pattern denier, okay? I agree there's patterns in the world, but like what confuses me about Platonism is like this like alternate dimension where essence exists, you know, and there's like perfect essence.
Sure, yeah.
Like that feels so like bizarre to me.
Right.
I don't know how you even go about like proving that or getting me there. But like, can't we have like Platonism where there's patterns just minus all the essence nonsense?
You can
well, yeah. So Aristotle tried, right? But like the problem with Aristotle is Aristotle's view commits to like ontological pluralism, which is pretty much agreed upon to be self-referentially incoherent.
You can say that any type of essence necessitates a material instantiation.
Mm-hmm.
So like
that would be the Aristotelian route.
Yeah.
Because so like for Aristotle, right? Aristotle would say that like their universals exist across all the things that have them. And so like if there were no white objects, then the concept of whiteness would just fail to exist, right? Whereas for Plato, even if there were no objects that were white, there would still be the form of whiteness existing platonically, right? But then, like I said, the problem for Aristotle is that Aristotle thinks there's like 10 ways of being that are all distinct, and that's self-referentially incoherent because there's no univocal sense of being, so he can't even commit to the claim there are 10 ways of being, because to commit to the claim there is 10 ways of being, he's committed to saying there is one univocal way of being that these 10 ways of being share in, which he denies. So it's self-referentially incoherent, and his view of universals requires it. You go the Kantian route, which would be like the constructivist route, which it sounds like you probably would be attracted to, which is that like they're just human constructs that we like project out onto the world. And so there is no actual like necessarily existing pattern in like two apples and two oranges. It's just that we construct this concept because it's useful and then we project it out into the world.
Like there might be a pattern depending on what it is, but like just to be clear, you would say that in the same way like Aristotle thinks that there's only 10 things, you would say there's an infinite number of essences, right? That like non-existent things that we haven't discovered, they all have essences. Aristotle
thinks that there's 10 ways of being, then all the various like things that exist cash out in one of those 10 ways. I think there's one way of being. I think I think ontological pluralism is incoherent. So like I would reject Aristotle's view because he would commit to ontological pluralism, and I reject it. For me, there's just one way of being. The forms exist in the same way that we exist. They just exist in a different realm. But that doesn't mean that they don't exist in the same way that we exist. Everything just exists, like full stop. And then things have properties.
If they exist in the realm, they're existing in a different way than we're seeing them. I don't understand what you just said.
Like, how would I discover that? Yeah,
How would you discover what?
like essences if they exist.
Well, you rationally apprehend them. That's like they're rationally apprehendable.
There we go. That's
Well, no, but you
train of thought that I want to piggyback off of. Do you think we can rationally apprehend all forms?
I don't know what Plato would say to that. Probably.
Because if
Like interestingly enough, like across the dialogues, like Plato like starts off with this like very clean view of the forms, where he thinks there's just like mathematical objects and properties and all this stuff, and then like slowly over time he like admits of there being like the form of dirt and like the form of fire and the form of water and the form of this and the form of man and all these different things. And like he kind of like he feels like very queasy about admitting of those like first, but then he like eventually comes around and says like, yeah, it's fine.
I feel like I don't know. I don't have this like I don't trust our rationality so much to say that we can apprehend all forms, even if there are forms. I think we're terribly limited.
Well, so I guess it depends on like what you're asking me. Do I think it's like conceivable that we could apprehend like all the forms? Like, yeah, by definition, it's conceivable. But like, do I think any single person could do it? Like, no, because we're like vastly limited creatures.
But if it's conceivable, it's possible. That's at least the common view in like modal logic.
Yeah, I reject conceivability entails possibility, but even still, like, when you say like, can we apprehend all the forms? What do you mean by that?
So like we have access.
Can we hold the concurrent set of all forms in our mind?
No. Is it just possible for us to get to them? It's like, do we have this like unique or divine or magical ability for us as like, to me, I just see us as like organisms walking around to like actually go out and grab any of the forms we feel like grabbing if we kind of put our minds to it. Not to hold them all in our minds at the same time, because that just,
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, I would say the same thing of like numbers, right? I would say like any one person could like rationally apprehend all the numbers, even though like you couldn't like in some sense hold every single number in your head simultaneously because there's an infinite number of them and we're finite beings. But like
we can do that with numbers. But what about the things that we just cannot think up of because we are so limited cognitively? Like there must be a realm beyond the realm of forms that we just can't have access to unless you admit that our capacity to reason is truly powerful, like really, really strong, that we can like see it all if we wanted to see it all.
I guess it depends on like what your view of like the world is, insofar as you admit of like what are genuine possible worlds. So if you think there's like really radically different possible worlds, where like the laws of nature are different and all these various things, which like I'm skeptical of, then like maybe I would say then like probably not. Like there are probably just some forms that are not apprehendable by us given like our current state. But given that like I'm probably inclined to say that a lot of things about reality are actually fixed and necessary, then I would probably be more on the side of that we can probably apprehend I would commit to like a like somewhat weaker thesis. I would say like we can probably apprehend most of the forms. Like that's what I would say. Like I'll commit to that.
Like the way I think about it, it's like I think I wrote a paper on like on conceivability. Like and my end point kind of was that some people are more cognitively capable than others, right? There are mathematicians
definitely
and geniuses out there that can conceive of things that I would never get close to, wrapping my head around or attaining or getting to the form of, if you want to use like Platonic dialogue. And then you can go really high up this degree of like the really, really smart people and then the average people like you and me, and then you can just go lower about like what can other organisms conceive of? And it seems like a little bit foolish to just think that like humans are we hit the ceiling of
Oh, I certainly don't. I don't think that we've hit the ceiling by any means. I do think that we have something that like makes us remarkably like different, is that we have this like capacity for reason in a way that like other like animals don't seem to have. Um, I think like reasoning is a like it's kind of gray, but it's also like kind of there's kind of a sharp like discontinuity in like reasoning capability. Like I think there's kind of like you have it or you don't. And like you could have like weaker forms of it, but like you ontologically have it or you don't, and like you kind of there's like a ontological distinction between like beings with a capacity for reason and beings without a capacity for reason that puts us on a different ontological playing field in terms of understanding reality. So like no matter how smart, quote unquote, you make a cow will probably never like generate the ability to like follow modus ponens.
it's like an orders of magnitude thing, because you can also compare a cow to like a molecule or something like that, and that's several orders of magnitude, I would think, like greater than the orders of magnitude going from a cow to us and modus ponens.
Right. So like I would say that like the jump from like cow to the jump from cow to molecule, or yeah, from cow no, sorry, to cow from molecule is like the same jump from like someone who's really stupid to like Einstein. Like that's the kind of like like jump that you're talking about. Or like think of really 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 vastly intelligent alien species, right? It's just a different on like you could have the smartest cow and the dumbest human and it doesn't matter, they're still ontologically distinct. And you could have ridiculously smart aliens that also have the capacity for reason, and they would be like significantly smarter than us, but they would recognize that we have the capacity for reason.
But it's exactly for that like reason of like difference in orders of magnitude of cognitive ability to reach at things, that I think that it's kind of like foolhardy to say that we can attain most or a lot of even like the majority or like a good chunk of the form.
Potentially, but I mean, I guess it depends on like how extravagant a view of the forms you're taking. So if we're operating with like a much weaker view of the forms, where it's just like mathematical objects and like properties and things like that, then I would say we have a very good grasp of those things. Now, to some degree, our grasp on mathematical objects is limited by our experience, and so like I admit of that, sure. And our grasp of like properties is certainly limited by, right, like there's clearly properties that like we are just physically incapable of sensing. For example, like there's animals that can like there's bats that communicate via like see via sound, right? Or there's animals that see like ultraviolet light. And so there are just properties that like we can never reason to because they're experiential. But nonetheless, it doesn't like disbar us from reasoning about the fact that like they could exist even if we can't experience them. Like we could very much reason to the fact that like there is a like property of echolocation, or like there is a property of like hearing by sound. There's an experience that's attached to it.
If like this were like the pie chart of like all possible forms or experiences or stuff we could know, and we already kind of agreed that the orders of magnitude between like a molecule to a cow would be the same as like, I don't know, a really dumb person to like Einstein or anything along those lines. I just feel like we only have a small sliver of anything, and so to extrapolate such a strong claim that we have this ability to know the essence of things, it seems more reasonable to go the route with Sartre on the whole. Let's just start with existence first. If we have such a weak grasp of essence, why don't we just start with existence?
Oh, because I just think, like I said earlier, I just don't even I can't even fathom what it means to start with existence. I think like no matter what, he's like sneaking in some kind of existence. He's sneaking in some kind of essence. He's just like hiding it really well. That's like that'd be like my fundamental critique of Sartre and what he's doing. This is I just think like no matter how much you try to like throw the baby out with the bathwater, the baby's gonna hold on for dear life, and like the essence is gonna sneak in prior to the existence somewhere. It just is like gonna depend on what you admit of as being part of essence. But like something's gonna sneak in.
Like can the essence just be emergent? Like can it just be like this is just an emergent quality of the existence? Like we're just noticing it after. Yeah.
Like this
Yeah,
pen
but it's
really
like
is just a tube, and it happens to be able to write. So we're gonna say that its essence is to write. But
right, but you're already like to describe it like let's just take a very weak understanding of essences as just like properties,
yeah,
right? Then like you're already admitting that it's a tube, which is already to say it has some set of properties of like roundness and like length and
examples
width.
talk about it.
Well,
Obviously,
so
this
you're blurring. I feel like you're blurring the lines between existence and essence. Like we all agree things exist. I feel like we're saying that they exist before the essence, but then you're pointing to like a thing that exists,
because to
like a
me,
tube, and then you're saying like that's also an essence. I don't know. Like
it
I feel
isn't.
like we need stricter
To me,
definitions
this
on.
isn't like the essence of this isn't to write stuff. It can just as much have the essence as like a thing I put on my ear, or like a paperweight, or like something to make music. I just decide what to use it as. It just happens to be the case that it's pretty efficient at doing a particular thing, and that we're going to ascribe that essence to it, but not because it is that essence. Like, I kind of decide whatever the fuck I want this to be. Same thing with a rock in the woods, or same thing as man. There's no first thing. It just has a
Yeah, so that I probably could buy. I mean, so like you're right. I guess we could maybe like tighten up the definition of what essence is. I mean, so there's kind of maybe like two traditional understandings of essence. Is essence just like the set of of intrinsic or like the set of essential properties, which like I guess is like sneaking in essential again. So that's a bad definition. So um, like a definition of essence based on properties would be like the set of properties required to be a thing, right? Or is like essence understood in more like functional. So like the function of a thing or the purpose of a thing is what gives it its essence. And it sounds like Sartre's attacking, at least like in what you've described, Chris, is like Sartre's attacking that latter definition of essence. Is like no. What a thing is meant to do in some sense definitely is like is post.
Because you were saying it's the first one. It's we could go the route of the properties that it requires it to be the thing. I think there we're already sneaking in essence because we're saying the thing as if it needs to be a thing, as opposed to just a set of affordances. You kind of get where I'm.
Yeah, no. Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess like if we're taking a more purely purpose, like a teleological understanding of essence, then I would have come at like my gripes with Sartre less like Platonic and more like centered on like free will. Then would be like where I would come at it from. I wouldn't necessarily like mount arguments from against Sartre like qua Plato as more like almost like Nietzschean style. Like I just completely reject free will, and so like his thesis of like we're condemned to be free, I just think is like definitely wrong. That would be like where I would attack it from then.
I assume you hold the first definition you gave, so you think that essence is like the shared properties that make a thing?
Yeah, that's like kind of probably where I am, but like I've come to know recently actually that like Plato held a much more like second centric, like the latter definition centric view of like what the forms actually are.
Yeah, because that's what I was thinking when we've been talking about essence. Like for the first definition, I feel like I can't separate existence and essence then, right? Because like if essence is the shared properties that make a thing, then like essence and existence kind of come about together, right? For a thing to exist, it needs an essence. And yeah, like I can't think of a thing that has one and not the other at any point in time. Like, is there ever an essence without existence or an existence without essence?
Then you need to appeal to form. I don't like appealing to forms because of our talking.
Yeah, because I can't point to a form, right? Yeah.
Well, you definitely can. You can't physically point to a form per se, but you definitely can point to a form, just like logically.
You know, hold a form.
Sorry, I mean like a pure form. Like I mean like a form without an existence. Wait, that doesn't even make sense. Sorry.
Think of an imaginary number.
What do you mean an imaginary? Are you
like one?
Assuming you're not using imaginary in a technical sense.
Well, yeah. But he would say imaginary numbers exist, no?
Yeah.
One second, I just to clarify.
Because
I'm
they-
assuming you mean imaginary, not in the technical sense of the term imaginary, right?
Oh, imaginary like I, like in math.
Oh, okay, so you are using it in the technical sense. Can I imagine it?
Yeah. Can you hold it in your reason?
Yeah,
Yeah. But it doesn't exist.
yeah.
like
Oh,
the square root of -1.
It's I.
Now is that the representation of it or the thing itself?
Well, I don't think we can hold the forms, like any of the forms, necessarily, like in our head directly. It's why it's like a relation, right?
We
You
can't.
don't hold the form in your mind. You like apprehend the form in your mind, which is like a very, I think it's like that's a qualitatively different phenomenon.
Well, actually, that's perfect then. So, like, can you ever hold a form in your mind without holding something's existence in your mind? Like, is that ever possible? Can I ever like separate the form
Um,
without like some instantiation of an existence, even if it's not like a present existence? Like, if I might like look at a pencil, or someone might say the word pencil, and I think of like a stereotypical like image of a pencil or like a cartoon image of a pencil, but like I feel like these things require me to have experienced something similar to it to imagine that.
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think probably not. But that I think that says more about just our biology than it says anything about the forms.
Well, but I think it says more than biology. I think it's like that would be evidence that leads me away from Platonism, because it seems to imply that if if essence, by your definition, if essence and existence are things that we can't separate out, then could it not be that only one of them exists? That it might just be that things just exist, and then there's like emergent essences that we're kind of
Emergent apport. Yeah.
yeah, that we're just viewing afterwards.
Yeah, I mean that sounds great. I just think it's incoherent, and like we could get into why, but I just like there's like I began the conversation with. You have to like if you admit of patterns, then you have to ask insofar what the patterns consist in, and they have to come up with like a theory of the way the patterns come about. And I just think that like Platonism, is like crazy as it sounds, is just the only one that holds up to any like scrutiny, even though it's like kind of weird. All the other ones just end up being incoherent. Like the Kantian account is like what it sounds like you're giving up, right? You're coming up with is like the kind of constructivist account of
Maybe
essences.
I don't know. I haven't read Kant.
Yeah,
on
that
this
sounds
topic.
roughly like what you're saying. Like Kant would say that like we construct um we construct like the property of redness in our mind because it helps make sense of the world and it's very useful and it's some sense like done by us and it's kind of an emergent property of the world, but like all the red things
Maybe,
don't.
but yeah, it sounded before like you were implying that like Kant would deny that like numbers have shared characteristics, which I definitely admit. Like numbers definitely there's something about like the emerging qualities of like two objects that I can say like this is one thing and this is another thing, right? These are like emergent things that I can
Right,
view, and I can say they have a shared quality. Like I wouldn't deny that.
right, but then so like
Um,
what are you cashing out that shared quality in? Like how is it that two things that are causally separate come to like come to emergently have like a shared property that's like one and the same property. It's like the exact same property in both cases, but they're causally distinct. Like it'd be one thing if like both things were created by like the same causal process. Like I'd be much like less concerned if you were like, well, like this apple tree like bequeathed three apples and they're all like qualitatively similar. Like that's fine because like they all came from like the same causal process. So like I think you could probably make sense of that. But
well, like so, what I would, but just to like answer the question, what I would say is that their like shared characteristic is that they're existent things, right? Like all existent things we can number. Like if there's a table, I can say it's one table. If there's two tables, I can say it's two tables. And since they're things that exist, I can apply these characteristics to them.
but what does it mean for there to be like two tables versus two of like another thing? What
What do you mean?
qualitatively can I pick out that's like similar across both distinct cases?
What? Well, qualitatively, that's distinct about them. I would say like the table's brown, and it like fits this category image of like
Well, no,
what
no,
we
but
as humanity have.
what are you
Yeah.
appealing to like doesn't presuppose two-ness that allows you to say that there's two tables and there's two chairs, even though they're distinct, causally distinct objects. Right. That's my contention. Is like
Yeah,
there's a bootstrap.
the fact that they
This
exist.
is the problem with the Kantian analysis on like in like a lot of people's views is that like it sounds great, right? It's really lean ontologically. It's just that there's like this massive bootstrapping problem. Is there's actually like
I don't understand what the problem is. Wait, you have to elaborate the problem then, because like it sounds to me like I'm seeing things that exist, and all things that exist seem to have like shared qualities of like me being able to number them, me being able to like see, well, not always see them, but like hold them in my mind. And insofar as I can do that, then I can like play around with them by like numbering things and
Like, I want to go
doing all
back.
that. Like I don't see what the problem.
I'm gonna have a hard time articulating this like point or thought, but I'll try my best. So like we were talking about degrees of magnitude on how we can like cognitively attain certain things. Let's take the example of the number 2. We either, for one reason or another, we can say 2 tables and then 2 apples, and those things share something in common, right? And we would think that's a very like human thing to consider. But like look at like developmental psychology when they show children like a bunch of quarters, right? 4 quarters, and there's one line of them where they're all together, and there's one line of them where they're all elongated. And you ask the kid, okay, well, which one has more quarters? They're always going to say the one they were all elongated, because we've developed this ability to, I don't want to say recognize patterns, but like it just happens to be the case that we look at certain things in certain ways and then go with it. Maybe it happens to be the case that we see certain things and go with it, but we're like limited at a certain level. So I don't want to put all my chips on the things like 2 and 2. I don't know if I explained that properly, but
Well, in that example, can it just be that the kids are stupid? Like if you if you gave that to adults, like couldn't the adults like see, oh, it's elongated, and they're like better at
things that we consider random and just like whatever. But really, if we were a little bit smarter or whatever, those would be the actual quote unquote forms or the concepts or the 4 is 4 here. And we're just like on one little scale of the whole thing. Of like that ladder.
Oh, that's a good point, actually. But like, if what Carson's saying is true, you would expect it to be like a priori. So like even like things that don't have high faculties of rationality should be able to grasp them like pretty easily. No,
you can
I assume, right?
That line of like of things that some people can come to reason or come to apprehend or afford. Some people can't. Not all humans can do the same thing as other humans. We're just, I don't know, we're like on this scale. And so to say that at one point it's like where we have reason and then where we're distinct, that just seems weird to me. I don't know how to, I'm like brain barfing. Hopefully that's half coherent.
No, I do think I understand the like relative criticism. I do want to go back really to the point of like it sounds to me like what you're saying, Peter, is like, okay, so there's like all these things that exist, right? And they're like qualitatively distinct and they're also qualitatively similar. And I'm like recognizing the ways in which they're qualitatively similar. And like my criticism is that like you're kind of sneaking in, like you can't just take for granted that they are qualitatively similar. Like I'm asking you to give an account of like why they're qualitatively similar and what that like qualitative similarity exists in, insofar as it like in your mind, is it a form? Is it a universal? Like what is the account of the similarity? Because like there doesn't need to be any account of like why things are different. There could just be a bunch of things that are all just like causally continuous with each other, and they're all just like they're themselves existing, and they bear no relation to anything else. But as soon as you say there are these things and they're similar, you're admitting that there's some kind of relation between the two things at a bare minimum, right? So you have to, I'm asking like, what is the account of that relation and how it exists? And as I've said, like repeatedly, Platonism is the only coherent account of that relation.
Like this would be easier with examples, but like, I guess it depends on what shared characteristic we're talking about in particular. I don't know, like I just don't see this as like a contradiction or like an issue, like at all. I just think we can Like things just have shared characteristics, you know? Like they're just built like that.
Right, but like, how are they having a shared characteristic? Like, what consists in the shared characteristic? When you say something like they have a shared characteristic, it's like you're begging the question of like, then what is the shared characteristic, right? You're committing to like the existence of a form. You're just like not realizing.
Wait, hold on.
It.
Okay, wait, can we? Let's go really slow, okay?
Sure.
So like, let's say I have one apple and I have like one orange, and you're like, they have the shared characteristic of oneness. Your question is, what's the shared characteristic, or what's the question there that you would ask?
So like let's use a different example from numbers because I think it's like probably more clear. So like, let's say you have an orange, like you have like a tennis ball, right? And it's like kind of like this like neon greeny yellow color, right? And then let's say like you have this like really offensive pair of like MC Hammer pants that are like the exact same color as the like tennis ball, right?
Okay.
And you ask like, are these